You ever wake up one morning, look out your window, and realize somebody just decided to rewrite reality without asking you? That's pretty much what happened to me when my parking spot disappeared overnight. I lived in a quiet little cul-de-sac, or at least, it used to be quiet. You know the kind of cookie-cutter houses, mailboxes lined up like soldiers, kids chalking the sidewalks, and an overzealous HOA that believed they were the Supreme Court, the IRS, and the FBI all rolled into one. They thought they had the power to tell you what color your curtain should be, how long your grass should grow, and even what kind of car you could drive. Now, normally, I stayed out of HOA politics. I was that neighbor who waved, smiled, and then minded his own business. My yard was trimmed, my trash bins were put away, and my porch light actually worked, so they never had much reason to harass me, until the day they decided my driveway wasn't enough, and they took my street parking spot. Not suggested I park elsewhere, not asked nicely. They straight up put a shiny new sign on the curb: "No parking, reserved for HOA vehicles only." I blinked at it like it was a hallucination. I rubbed my eyes, walked down to the curb, and there it was, a fresh metal sign drilled right into the ground where my truck usually sat. I muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." That's when old Marjorie, the HOA president, appeared like a vulture circling a carcass. She had that smug smile people get when they think they've won some unspoken battle. Clipboard in one hand, iced coffee in the other. "Good morning, neighbor," she sang. "I see you noticed the new parking designation. HOA vehicles need priority access on this street." I squinted. "What HOA vehicles? None of you own a tow truck. You all drive hybrids that can fit in your own driveways." Her smile tightened. "Rules are rules. You'll have to use your driveway." Now, I'm not the kind of guy who picks fights, but when you touch a man's parking spot, it's war, especially when it's in front of my own house. I took a long breath and said, "Interesting, Marjorie, that's not exactly your curb to claim." She chuckled, like I was some ignorant child. "The HOA governs all common areas, including the road." "Oh," I said, nodding. "See, that's where you're wrong, because here's the kicker, and this is the part nobody knew. I didn't just live in this neighborhood, I owned it. Well, not the houses, but the actual land the road sat on." Long story short, the developer who built this place had gotten into financial trouble years back, and I swooped in at a county auction, dirt cheap. Barely anyone bid. I figured I'd flip it later, but the paperwork was clear. The HOA technically didn't own the road. I did. At the time, I thought it was just a funny little trivia fact to bring up at barbecues. But now, now it was my nuclear option. So, I leaned in close to Marjorie and whispered like I was sharing a secret, "You may run the HOA, but I own the street." She laughed in my face. "Don't be ridiculous." But when I pulled out my phone, opened my county deed records app, and showed her my name printed right there under owner of parcel 14B roadway, her smirk dissolved faster than ice in July. Her jaw clenched. "There's a broken bar. This must be some mistake." "Nope," I said cheerfully. "So unless you'd like to start paying me rent for that curb, I suggest you take your shiny new sign and stick it somewhere else." I thought that'd be the end of it. I figured, okay, Marjorie realizes she overstepped. Everyone laughs, and we move on. But HOAs don't move on. They double down. The very next week, I woke up to find a letter taped to my door. In official, bolded typeface, it read, "Notice of non-compliance." Apparently, my truck was in violation of community aesthetics because it was too large, too loud, and not aligned with neighborhood values. I almost spit out my coffee reading that. They were trying to ban my truck now. I drove that truck for years. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, paid off, reliable, and it hauled everything from firewood to furniture. Now, according to the HOA, it was a menace to society. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control. And if they wanted a war, I was more than ready. See, when you own a road, you don't just own asphalt. You own power. That power comes with the ability to restrict, approve, or deny permits for development. And in our case, the HOA's big plan was to expand the neighborhood. New houses, new dues, more control. But their expansion required one little thing: certification that the street was buildable and accessible. Guess who had the authority to approve that? That's right, me. So at the next home meeting, when Marjorie puffed her chest and announced their grand vision for Phase 2 of our lovely community, I raised my hand like an obedient student. "Quick question," I said casually, "how are you planning to certify the road for construction access?" She narrowed her eyes. "That's already being handled." I smiled. "Interesting, because last I checked, I'm the one who signs off on that, and as of this morning, I've filed paperwork declaring the street unbuildable." The room went silent. You could hear the sound of pens dropping. Marjorie stammered, "You a broken bar, you can't do that." "Oh, I absolutely can," I said, pulling out a copy of the declaration like a magician with a rabbit. "This street is now legally designated as a private access road, unsuitable for further development. No construction, no expansions, no new houses." Gasps echoed around the table. One guy whispered, "He nuked Phase 2, a broken bar." That's when Marjorie lost it. She slammed her clipboard down. "This is outrageous. You're sabotaging the community." I leaned back in my chair, calm as a monk. "No, Marjorie, I'm protecting it from power-hungry board members who think they can steal people's parking spots." For the next month, chaos reigned. The HOA tried everything. They called emergency meetings. They sent nasty letters. They even tried to threaten me with legal action, which fizzled out the moment my lawyer sent back a copy of the deed. And the best part? The county sided with me. My paperwork was clean, my rights were clear, and my declaration stood firm. Phase 2 was dead in the water. Meanwhile, that no parking sign mysteriously vanished one night. My truck was back in its rightful spot, and no one dared say a word. Neighbors started giving me nods of respect. Some even whispered legend when I walked by. And Marjorie, let's just say her smile wasn't quite so smug anymore. She still strutted around with her clipboard, but everyone knew the score. See, HOAs thrive on fear and compliance. The moment you stand up to them with facts, the whole illusion cracks. And me, I didn't just crack it, I bulldozed it. So now, whenever I park my truck in front of my house, I smile, not just because I won the battle, but because I know the truth. They might control the mailboxes, the lawns, and the paint colors, but I own the ground they walk on, literally. And if they ever forget that again, well, let's just say I've got plenty of paper left for more declarations. Because in the end, the HOA didn't steal my parking spot. They handed me the perfect excuse to remind them who really holds the keys, not to the neighborhood, to the road beneath it. After I nuked their little expansion plans by declaring the street unbuildable, you'd think the HOA would have learned their lesson. You'd think they'd back off, lick their wounds, and maybe go back to harassing people about mailbox paint colors. But HOAs don't quit. They regroup, they scheme, and then they come back twice as annoying. At first, it was little things. My trash bins got accidentally tagged for violations they supposedly left out too long, even though I had rolled them in within an hour. My grass was suddenly out of regulation length even though I literally measured it with a ruler. They even had the nerve to send me a fine for excessive wind chimes. I don't even own wind chimes. It was laughable. They were trying to nickel and dime me into submission. One evening, my neighbor Paul came over while I was tinkering with my truck. He was a quiet guy, accountant, always mowing his lawn at precise 45-degree angles. He leaned in and whispered like we were in a spy movie, "Hey, a broken bar, just a heads up. I was at the last home meeting. They're planning something big. They're talking about challenging your deed." I raised an eyebrow. Challenging a recorded deed? That's like challenging gravity. Good luck with that. Paul shrugged. "Marjorie thinks she can rally the neighborhood. She said if they vote you out, the county will have to listen." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my wrench. Vote me out of owning a road? What's next? Voting the sun out of the sky? But Paul wasn't smiling. "They're serious. She's got a lawyer coming." Ah, that explained the sudden confidence. Someone had convinced her she had a chance. So I did what any reasonable man in my position would do. I got ahead of it. The neighborhood BBQ Gambit. The following weekend, I hosted a block party. Free food, cold drinks, live music courtesy of a Bluetooth speaker at the works. I rolled my smoker out, filled the air with ribs and brisket, and invited the whole neighborhood, even the HOA board, especially the board. People showed up in droves, kids ran around with popsicles, dads argued over football, moms swapped recipes, and everyone was having a good time. I made sure to chat with everyone, smile, shake hands, and most importantly tell them the truth about the road. "See, folks," I said, "flipping burgers, the HOA's been telling you they run everything. But here's the funny part, this street, this very road under your feet, legally mine. That means when they say they're building new houses, not without my signature, and when they say I'm breaking rules by parking in front of my house, that's a joke, because technically, they're parking on my property." You should have seen the looks. People weren't angry at me, they were angry at them. Turns out, most of the neighbors weren't thrilled about Phase 2 anyway. More houses meant more traffic, higher dues, and less privacy. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain, I was the guy protecting the neighborhood from greedy expansion. By the end of the night, I had more allies than the HOA ever expected. Even Mrs. Klein, who once reported me because she thought my Christmas lights were too colorful, told me I was doing the right thing. And Marjorie, she didn't even show up. The lawyer trick, of course, that didn't stop her. A week later, I got a certified letter in the mail. The HOA had hired a lawyer, some slick guy with a fancy letterhead claiming my deed was unenforceable because roads were public by nature. Cute argument, except it ignored the fact that this wasn't a county-maintained road. No tax dollars paved it, no city trucks salted it in the winter. The developer had built it privately, and the county had sold it to me fair and square. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Denise who loved nothing more than dismantling arrogant arguments, sent back a response so brutal I almost felt bad. Almost. She cited statute after statute, threw in legal precedents, and ended with, "If your client wishes to pursue this further, we'll be requesting reimbursement for harassment and legal fees." Silence. Not another peep from the lawyer. But the HOA wasn't done. You'd think after Marjorie stormed out, after the neighbors clapped me into legend status, and after the HOA crumbled like stale bread, that would have been the end of it. But here's the thing about power, people don't like losing it, and HOAs, they're like weeds, you cut one down, and a new sprout pops up somewhere else. For a while, things were peaceful, the street was calm, people waved at me like I was some kind of folk hero, and the biggest drama in the neighborhood was whose dog left a present on whose lawn. I almost forgot about the war, almost, because one Tuesday morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through emails, I saw a letter from the city planning department. At first, I thought it was junk, but then I read the subject line, "Request for road access approval, a Maple Grove expansion." My eyes narrowed. Expansion? Again? The email detailed the proposal submitted by a a development company. They wanted to buy the empty lots around the neighborhood, build 50 new houses, and integrate Maple Grove into a larger planned community. I muttered, over my dead body. Attached to the proposal was a familiar name, the contact person, none other than Marjorie. Apparently, she hadn't slunk away quietly. She'd gone behind the scenes, teamed up with a developer, and tried to sneak the project past me. And here's the kicker, they'd attached a document claiming the HOA had voted unanimously to approve it. Unanimously? Last I checked, the HOA barely had enough people left to form a book club. I leaned back, smiling. If they wanted a fight, they'd picked the wrong battlefield. Step 1, the paper trail. Now, I could have just emailed back and said, "Nope, denied, road's mine," but where's the fun in that? Instead, I decided to play chess. First, I sent a polite response requesting additional documentation. I asked for meeting minutes, voting records, and proof of unanimous consent. Days later, they sent over a packet of paperwork. I read through it carefully. At first glance, it looked official. Stamps, signatures, the whole 9 yards. But then I noticed something odd. The signatures were all identical. Like, carbon copy identical. And one of the names belonged to old Mr. Harrison, who had moved to Florida 2 years ago. Busted. They'd forged their own paper. City projects like this require public hearings. That meant the developers had to present their plan, and residents had the right to voice opinions. Perfect. I showed up to the hearing in my best jacket, deed documents neatly tucked under my arm, The developers had their whole team there, race suits, charts, flashy PowerPoints. Marjorie sat in the corner, smirking like she'd already won. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up calmly, set the deed on the podium, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we waste any more time, let me clarify one thing. The road you're proposing to use for construction, it doesn't belong to the HOA. It doesn't belong to the developer. It belongs to me." I held up the deed like it was Excalibur. "And as the legal owner, I've already declared it unbuildable." The room buzzed. The city officials leaned in. One of the developers whispered something that looked an awful lot like "oh, crap." Then I dropped the cherry on top. "And, by the way, the HOA paperwork you've been given forged. One of those signatures is from a man who lives in Florida now. I can give you his phone number if you want confirmation." You could have heard a pin drop. The lead official cleared his throat. "A broken bar is highly irregular." I smiled. "Not irregular, illegal." The developers started sweating bullets. Marjorie sank lower in her chair. Needless to say, the proposal was denied on the spot.